Hello, everybody. Today I will be dealing with the second session of the module, a reading of The Highwayman and a very brief overview. You will be wondering why a reading of the poem is necessary. Many students have constantly asked this question as to how to improve speaking skills. There are different situations where we learn to speak a new language, and each situation demands a new type of conversation or a new form of the language. When you are speaking casually to your friends, your language is different. When you are dealing with a presentation, your language is different. When you're delivering a speech and addressing an audience, your language is different. In order to learn how to speak in different situations, well, one has to speak. You have to practice speaking. One strategy that you can employ is to pick up a poem and try and read it loudly. Because when you read a poem loudly, you get a hold over the music of the language, the intonation, where you have to stress and where you have to pause, where your pitch has to rise and where it has to fall. Because language is not just words, also the sound conveys sense. So in order to be an effective speaker, you have to learn to practice and rehearse speaking. As I said, one way of doing is picking up a poem and learning to recite it. So let's try and listen to The Highwayman. It is divided into two parts. I'll first read the first part. The Highwayman. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. He'd a French cocked hat on his forehead, a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of the claret velvet, and breeches of brown doeskin. They fitted with never a wrinkle. His boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jeweled twinkle, his pistol buds a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle, under the jeweled sky. Over the cobbles he clattered and clashed in the dark inn yard. He tapped with his whip on the shutters, but all was locked and barred. He whistled a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. And dark in the dark old inn-yard, a stable wicket creaked, where Tim the ostler listened. His face was white and peaked, his eyes were hollows of madness, his hair like mouldy hay. But he loved the landlord's daughter, the landlord's red-lipped daughter. Dumb as a dog he listened, and he heard the robber say, One kiss, my bonny sweetheart, I'm after a prize tonight. But I shall be back with the yellow gold before the morning light. Yet if they press me sharply and harry me through the day, then look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. He rose upright in the stirrups. He scarce could reach her hand. But she loosened her hair in the casement. His face burnt like a brand. As the black cascade of perfume came tumbling over his breast, and he kissed its waves in the moonlight. Oh, sweet black waves in the moonlight. Then he tugged at his rein in the moonlight and galloped away to the west. So we are dealing with the first part of the poem, which is about a very romantic interaction between Bess and the highwayman. But in this sweet interaction and this romantic setting, there is a slight disharmony which is created because of Tim, the ostler, the stable boy, who is a jealous lover, and he listens to the conversation with envy. A kind of madness possesses him. Now we'll move on to the second part and see what the second part says. He did not come in the dawning, he did not come at noon, and out of the tawny sunset, before the rise of the moon, when the road was a gypsy's ribbon looping the purple moor, a red-coat troop came marching, marching, marching. King George's men came marching up to the old inn door. They said no word to the landlord. They drank his ale instead. But they gagged his daughter and bound her to the foot of her narrow bed. Two of them knelt at her casement with muskets at their side. There was death at every window, and hell at one dark window. For Bess could see through her casement the road that he would ride. They had tied her up to attention with many a sniggering jest. They had bound a musket beside her, with the muzzle beneath her breast. Now keep good watch, and they kissed her. She heard the doomed man say, look for me by moonlight, watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. She twisted her hands behind her, but all the knots held good. She writhed her hands till her fingers were wet with sweat or blood. They stretched and strained in the darkness, and the hours crawled by like years. Till now, on the stroke of midnight, cold on the stroke of midnight, the tip of one finger touched it. The trigger, at least, was hers. The tip of one finger touched it. She strove no more for the rest. Up she stood up to attention, with the muzzle beneath her breast. She would not risk their hearing, she would not strive again, for the road lay bare in the moonlight, blank and bare in the moonlight, and the blood of her veins in the moonlight throbbed to her love's refrain. Clot, 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 clot. Had they heard it? The horse hoofs ringing clear. Clot, 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 in the distance. Were they deaf that they did not hear? Down the ribbon of moonlight over the brow of the hill, the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The redcoats looked to their priming. She stood up, straight and still. Cluck clucked in the frosty silence, cluck clucked in the echoing night. Nearer he came and nearer. Her face was like a light. Her eyes grew wide for a moment. She drew one last deep breath. Then her finger moved in the moonlight. Her musket shattered the moonlight, shattered her breast in the moonlight, and warned him with her death. He turned. He spurred to the west. He did not know who stood, bowed, with her head over the musket, drenched with her own blood. Not till dawn he heard it, and his face grew grey to hear how Bess, the landlord's daughter, the landlord's black-eyed daughter, had watched for her love in the moonlight and died in the darkness there. Back he spurred like a madman, shrieking a curse to the sky, with the white road smoking behind him and his rapier brandished high. Blood-red were his spurs in the golden noon, wine-red was his velvet coat, when they shot him down on the highway, down like a dog on the highway, and he lay in his blood on the highway, with a bunch of lace at his throat. And still, of a winter's night they say, when the wind is in the trees, when the moon is a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas, when the road is a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, a highwayman came riding, riding, riding. A highwayman comes riding up to the old inn door. Over the cobbles he clatters and clangs in the dark inn yard. He taps with his whip on the shutters, but all is locked and barred. He whistles a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. As you see, part 2 is quite different from part 1. In part 2, you have blood, you have the color red, you have death, you have suspense, you have anxiety, you have tension, and then you have the supernatural element. So the second part is quite different from the first part. The person who wrote this poem is Alfred Noyce. He was an English poet, short story writer and playwright who began writing at a very early age in life. His first collection was published when he was only 21 years old, The Loom of Years. It is said, and it has been documented, that he said that he wrote The Highwayman in just 2 days, and that too when he was just 24. It's not surprising, because when you are young, you can write a lot about love. The Highwayman was published in 1906. As I told you, there is drama, suspense, supernatural element in the ballad. How is it woven as a thread? There is an underlying scheme when the plot is conceived. First, the characters are introduced, then the conflict or the problem is introduced through the characters and through the theme. That is through Highwayman, through Bess, and through the ostler. Then the problem reaches a peak. The peak is when the redcoats come marching and tie Bess up, and they wait for the highwayman. And Bess kills herself to warn him. So that's the climax. After that, you have the falling action. The emotion reaches its peak when Bess kills herself and sacrifices her life. After that, all the emotions that you find kind of goes a little downward. The intensity is in the climax. So the highwayman comes back, he is shot, and the whole problem is resolved not in this life but in afterlife when the two meet. So this is the whole scheme, the structure of the plot in the ballad. We've already talked about the features of a ballad. You see all those features in this ballad. There is a story there, it's a love story. And this love story, there is drama because it is complicated. He is, after all, a robber, a highwayman, and Bess loves a person who is wanted by the law. You have a jealous lover there. So there is a lot of drama going around these things. A lot of imagery is used. The purple moor, the ribbon of moonlight, ghostly galleon, jeweled sky. These all are images, are mental pictures, word pictures that are created mentally in your mind when you read them. So the entire ballad is full of such very vivid imagery. Look for me by moonlight, watch for me by moonlight is the refrain, the repetitive line that is being used to tell you about the different contexts. In the first part, it is anticipation. In the second part, the same lines give a different meaning. That is fear and anxiety. The language used is very accessible. And if you notice, there is no comment, just description of the way the redcoats behave, the way Tim behaves, and even no comment on the death of Bess and the highwayman. It's just a narrative which is recounted. So the perspective is pretty objective. Thank you.